Welcome back. We'll pick up with Chapter 14, Infection Control. So with infection control, there's a few things to this. First of all, you have to understand how microorganisms that cause disease work and how can we identify them. And then we have to know that in order to know how to stop the spread of the infection. So we use what are called aseptic techniques. So we'll take a look at all of those. So microorganisms or microbes. So we have these everywhere. They're good, they could be bad, but they're small living organisms. They're too small, you can't see them just looking at them. You need to be able to use a microscope or an electron microscope in order to see these organisms. They're found everywhere. The term that we use to describe them is ubiquitous. Ubiquitous means that they are literally everywhere. Okay, they're all over your body. We call that your flora of your body. That's the base layer of bacteria that constantly resides on your skin everywhere. And what it actually does is it keeps bad bacteria from being able to attach to your skin. So it's kind of a little layer of protection in a way. We also use microorganisms in our GI tract, in our intestines, to be able to break down food. The majority of our digestion comes from microorganisms. We have specific, enzymes that we use in our body to break down food, but the majority of digestion comes from bacteria in our gut, and that is also part of the flora of our body. So these microorganisms, when they don't hurt us or when they're beneficial to us, we call them non-pathogens. A non-pathogen could potentially be pathogenic if it's in the wrong spot. But in general, if it's not hurting us, we call them non-pathogens. Pathogens are disease-causing organisms. We also call them germs or bugs, and those are what are actually cause infection and disease. In general, bacteria and pathogens have figured out where their food source is. They have adapted over time to be able to grow and multiply best in warm, dark, moist environments. So believe it or not, we could include our room temperature in that. So they actually grow best between 70 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The normal incubation period for most bacteria and pathogens is 24 to 72 hours. So they can actually grow and multiply pretty quickly in that environment. And that's actually what we like to set our houses at. Businesses generally set their thermostats for 70 or 72 degrees. So actually, if you even just lower your thermostat to 68 or 69 degrees, you inhibit the growth of the majority of your pathogens in your home. Anyway, so these pathogens like darkness because the sun dehydrates them and it heats them up too much. And then the moisture is their water source. They require food, oxygen, water, just like we do to survive. So they need a source of food to be able to maintain themselves. So if they attach to your skin, your dead skin cells are wonderful food for them. If, like in your bathroom or your kitchen, there's constantly a food source going through there. That's why those are the two areas of your house that you need to keep the cleanest, because they build up with, say, like human waste with the toilet or the sink or your shower. You wash your hair or you use soap. It doesn't completely wash off of the sides of the shower and the tub. Bacteria can attach to that and use that as food to grow. Okay, so these microorganisms like these environments where they have a food and water source and it's the perfect temperature. That's where they can grow the best. The human body is the perfect host for all of this, right? It's just like if we were to go to the best resort that we could imagine, and we have servants that are bringing us food and beverages and taking care of our every whim, and we don't have to go anywhere, right? We prefer that. Well, bacteria prefer us for the same reasons. So there's different, I keep saying bacteria, but really I should be saying pathogens. There's different classifications of pathogens, okay, microbes. There's bacteria, there's protozoa, fungi, rickettsia, viruses. So each one of them has their own little niche and their own types of characteristics that set them apart from the others. So bacteria, I've already kind of hit on this in class. They're one-celled organisms. They multiply exponentially. And we tend to name them and classify them based off of what they look like, right? So if you remember, the cocci are circular, spherical cells, and that you can have diplococci where they grow in pairs. You can have streptococci where they grow in chains, and you have staphylococci where they grow in clusters. That's going to be very important. And based on whether or not they're gram-positive or gram-negative, that will kind of determine what kind of antibiotics work to kill them, or what kind of what else we could do to kill them off as well. Okay, then we also have the bacilli, which are rod-shaped bacteria, and those can grow in twos. They can grow in chains, right? Just like diplococci and streptococci. You can have diplobacilli and you can have streptobacilli. Okay. Sometimes they can have a little tail for locomotion. That's called a flagellum. And then also sometimes they have little hairs all over their body, and they can use that for locomotion as well to be able to move from one place to another. Those are called cilia. Sometimes bacteria, more often bacilli-shaped bacteria, can have what are called spores. Spores are kind of like your seed of the bacteria that houses a lot of genetic material. It's very hard to crack. And they tend to be the way that it can repopulate and regerminate the bacteria. So if you were to, say, take some antibiotics and it kills the living bacteria but leaves the spores, you're going to have another outbreak potentially in the next couple of weeks because you did not kill the spores. Okay, so some bacteria causing diseases. Let's see. I'm trying to remember some of them. We're going to go over them in class on Monday, so you'll have to be able to look up in the book and online and how to research what diseases they cause and what types of treatment are involved. Okay, bacteria also have spirilla or vibrio-shaped bacteria. So the vibrio is like the elbow macaroni shape. And then the corkscrew or the spiral shaped, that's a spirochete. Okay. All right. So we use antibiotics in particular to be able to kill bacteria. And not every antibiotic works for every bacteria, right? Like we've talked about, there's differences in shapes. There's differences if they have spores or not. There's differences between gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. So different antibiotics will work for different bacteria. And then there's actually some bacteria that have kind of almost grown fangs. Like when you take antibiotics and it kills most of the bacteria, but then you have a couple that are left over that antibiotic actually didn't kill them. Well, guess what? What doesn't kill them makes them stronger. And the next time you use that same antibiotic, it's not going to kill them, right? So now you've created antibiotic resistant bacteria. And this has always kind of happened throughout time. But now that we have patients that are not taking a full round of antibiotics, or maybe they're drinking alcohol with their antibiotics when they shouldn't be, something, right, where they haven't actually treated themselves the way that they should have. That's how we're kind of finding this antibiotic resistant bacteria popping up. Also, in healthcare facilities, we use hand sanitizer, we use antibacterial soaps. These should not be used outside of the healthcare setting on a regular basis because those also contribute to antibiotic resistant bacteria. And in class, I will show you an example of how and why we get these antibiotic resistant bacteria. Next, we have protozoa. So these are animal-like organisms, which means that we can potentially use some antibiotics to kill some protozoa. There's also anti-protozoic medications, but those are few and far between. So protozoa basically are found in decaying materials and contaminated water. So these are the organisms that are more likely to have some sort of flagella or cilia on them for movement. So we'll go over diseases for those in class. Fungi, or fungi, however you'd like to say it, these are more plant-like organisms, so antibiotics are not going to work on fungi. They like to live and breed on dead organic matter, so they kind of break them down as food. Yeast and molds can be lumped into the fungi field. Some of them are pathogenic, some of them aren't. Like we eat fungus on almost a daily basis for some of us, like mushrooms. If you like mushrooms on your pizza or you like mushrooms in your pasta, something like that. There are some mushrooms, they are fungus, right? But they're completely edible and nutritious. But then others can kill us. So for the pathogenic fungi, we use antifungal medications. A common disease with this is athlete's foot. Okay, you can't use antibiotics to get rid of athlete's foot. You have to use an antifungal medication for that. Next, we have Rickettsia. Rickettsia are parasitic organisms, very similar to bacteria. Some of them are actually considered bacteria, but Rickettsia in particular feast off of fleas, ticks, animals, humans, and they're transferred to humans through fleas, ticks, mites, lice, and generally they're not spread human to human. And these organisms don't live independently. They have to be inside of a living organism in order to survive. Uh, so because these are very similar and can actually some be classified as bacteria as well, antibiotics do work for them. Next we have viruses, which are a really difficult concept to truly understand. Viruses are so small that we can only see them with an electron microscope. We're not going to see viruses with a regular microscope. They're literally just DNA or RNA, depending on what type of virus, just floating around in the atmosphere, and they're wrapped in their own kind of envelope, and they weasel their way into our cells and use our cells as a factory to replicate their virus, to make viral cells to be able to infect other cells. But they generally need to be inside of a cell in order to reproduce because they have to use that host cell. They have to use their cell like a factory. Viruses are really difficult to kill. A lot of times they'll go inactive before we can kill them, which is difficult because it could resurface in your system years later. So an example of this is the virus that causes chickenpox. This is herpes zoster. Herpes zoster in children is kind of a systemic thing because their bodies haven't been able to figure out how to fight it off yet, and they break out with these little itchy bumps all over their body. And it usually takes a week, maybe two, for the body to overcome this. And generally, this is one virus that will inactivate before we can actually kill it. In humans, as an adult, this can resurface as shingles. So even though you've had chickenpox before, it can still resurface as chickenpox. It generally doesn't, but once you become an adult, it will attack one specific part of your nervous system. Generally, it'll infect a spinal nerve root that comes out of your spine, and it will be a localized rash or almost scaly skin, and it hurts and it itches. Um, and then our bodies overcome it again, and it generally goes dormant. And then when our immune systems drop later on in our lives for whatever reason, through stress, poor nutrition, lack of sleep, something like that, then the virus could actually reactivate again. Viruses are very tricky. There's a lot of them. Viruses, because they're literally just genetic material floating everywhere, that genetic material can become corrupt very easily. It can actually mutate and change its genetic code. Generally, these are point shift mutations where only one or two genes or a select part of the strand of genes has been changed, either from the host cell or from other viral cells or bacterial cells they come in contact with. And then when they mutate, our bodies may not necessarily recognize them and may not be able to kill them right away. So some examples of viruses that have mutated in the past and have actually killed many people: there's SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, West Nile virus, monkeypox, Ebola. There's actually several main strains of Ebola. This began in kind of West Africa in the Congo, and every once in a while when it mutates, you see an outbreak where a bunch of people are all of a sudden infected. And actually about 10 years ago, Ebola mutated to a very virulent strain, and we found that it became an epidemic in Africa, and it actually became a pandemic and started to spread to other continents and other countries. We actually had Ebola in the United States that killed several people, and it's from a traveler that came from Africa. We have the H5N1. This is the avian bird flu. Then you have swine flu. Those are mutated versions of one another. Hepatitis B, we've learned about this in bloodborne pathogens. So this is spread through blood and bodily secretions. It affects the liver. Right? If we look at the word hepatitis, if we break it into pieces, itis, I-T-I-S, means inflammation. Hepat, or hepato as the combining form, means liver. So this directly impacts the liver. It causes inflammation in the liver, which can cause the person infected to become jaundiced, which is where their liver isn't functioning to filter things out of their blood, and you get a buildup of what's called bilirubin. Causes your skin to get yellow. So with this, there is a vaccine available. There's also a vaccine if you've potentially been exposed to it, that hopefully you get it soon enough so that your body can figure out how to kill the hepatitis B before it overtakes your body. But generally, if you work in the healthcare field, they will offer you a hepatitis B vaccine. Hepatitis C, a lot of similarities between B and C. So hepatitis C, this is also transmitted by blood and bodily fluids. This is, I would say, more common than hepatitis B, but there's not actually a vaccination for hepatitis C, which is why it's a little more concerning, and you see a higher occurrence of it because people aren't able to protect themselves from it once they get infected. Okay. All right, AIDS, this is caused by the HIV bug, the human immunodeficiency virus. So HIV infects your immune cells and replicates to kill more immune cells until it eventually knocks out your entire immune system. And when that happens, that's when you develop AIDS. Okay, so generally people with AIDS aren't able to fight off a common cold. They get opportunistic infections is what they're called. And so they could be more susceptible to things like thrush, which is a fungal infection that normal healthy individuals won't get, even if they come into contact with it, because their body can fight it off. So with this, really, there's no treatment, there's no vaccine, and ultimately our only course of action is to prevent people from getting HIV. So there's viruses. Now we'll get into helminths. Helminths are a worm or a fluke. Okay, an example of this would be uh, oh, tapeworm. Tapeworms are those worms that you get through contaminated food, and they attach to the lining of your intestines, and they grow and they grow and they grow, and they're a parasite. They feed off of the nutrition that you put into your body. Some people are stupid enough to be able to eat tapeworms on purpose because they wind up losing weight. Well, they lose weight because they're starving themselves, which is not a good way to lose weight. But sometimes you can kill these helminths with drugs if they're small enough. If they're large enough, they may need to be removed surgically. Okay, but helminths, some forms can actually be spread through infected insects if they were to bite you, or if the worms come into contact with an opening in your skin. Now, there's some pathogens where the actual bug doesn't necessarily um, cause the problems. It's what the bacteria create is toxic. An example of this is botulism, okay, where the poison that it secretes is toxic to our bodies, and that's actually what starts to shut our body down. Then there's some pathogens that cause an allergic reaction, and then there's some that actually invade our living cells and destroy them. So there's different ways that they can cause disease in people. So when we look at diseases, we can separate them also by how they begin or where they begin. Okay, there's endogenous, exogenous, nosocomial, opportunistic. So endogenous originates inside of the body. Endo means inside. Genus means uh, originates or produces, right? So this is generally something that starts inside of your body. So it could be congenital anomalies, tumors, cancer, metabolic disorders, that kind of thing. Exogenous, this is where it comes from outside the body, right, and causes trouble inside. So that could be electric shock if you get electrocuted, temperature extremes, if you get dehydration, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, chemical agents, radiation, what have you. Then you have nosocomial. This means that you acquired this disease, this infection, inside of a healthcare facility. In hospitals, clinics, or doctors' offices, you have a higher occurrence of pathogens because that's where all the sick people go. And we use aseptic techniques in these facilities to keep and prevent the spread of disease. However, they can still occur, especially if, say, people visiting that facility don't understand or don't know what precautions to take after they touch certain things or certain people. So, in these environments, because we are using a lot of hand sanitizer, a lot of antibiotic or antibacterial soaps, and then also people have also come into contact with antibiotic resistant microorganisms. They're in there because their body can't fight it off and the doctors can't kill it, so it's getting worse. So you have a higher occurrence of antibiotic resistant organisms in these facilities as well. So it's a lot easier to get sick when you're around sick people. If you happen to, that's called a nosocomial infection. Opportunistic. These are diseases that happen when your immune system is knocked down. Okay, so generally in a normal, healthy human being, you're not going to get these. So this could be Kaposi's sarcoma, pneumocystis carinii, which is a pneumonia generally found in people with AIDS. So AIDS knocks out your immune system. You have cancer, you're going through treatments that knocks out your immune system, right? So opportunistic infections are ones that take advantage of these individuals that have a damaged immune system. So that leads us to the chain of infection, which I would like to pick up with in class on Monday. And we're going to do a little project with this as well. So, um, this is probably the most important part of the entire chapter because we have to understand how disease is spread from one person to another. And if we can, at any point in the time, keep that from happening, we do not have the spread of the disease. So, this is why it's so important. So, I'll pick up with this on Monday.